Pattie Boyd was born on March 17, 1944, in a small historic town called Taunton in Somerset, England. Her mom and dad were Colin Ian Langdon Boyd and Diana Frances Boyd. They lived during the time right after World War II ended in Britain. Her dad, Colin, was in the Royal Air Force, which is like the airplane part of the military. Because of his job, Pattie's family had to move around a lot when she was growing up. They never stayed in one place very long and sometimes even lived in different countries. All this traveling helped young Pattie learn to adapt to new places and people, which made her confident and poised. These qualities would really help her later when she became a model. In 1953, when Pattie's dad left the Royal Air Force, the family finally settled down in one place in England. This meant they could finally have a more normal, stable life without constantly moving around. Pattie was the oldest child in her family, so she naturally took care of her younger brothers and sisters. She had one brother named Colin and two sisters named Jenny and Paula. The four of them were really close and loved each other a lot. Later on, her parents got divorced and then each married someone else. This meant Pattie's family got even bigger. She got two stepbrothers named David and Robert Jr., and two stepsisters named Claire and Julia. Having all these different family members from different backgrounds helped Pattie become really good at understanding people and getting along with all kinds of personalities. This skill would help her a lot when she entered the fancy and sometimes difficult world of fashion and fame. Pattie finished school in 1961 and passed 3 GCE O-level exams, which was pretty good for a young woman back then. But even though she did okay in school, Pattie's real talent wasn't in studying from books. Her gift was in art and expressing herself creatively. The next year, in 1962, Pattie moved to London. At that time, London was the coolest place in the world for young people. Everything was changing there with new music, new fashion, and new ideas. The city was full of energy, bright colors, and people trying new things. Pattie arrived at just the right time to be part of this amazing cultural revolution. At first, Pattie got a job washing people's hair at a fancy salon called Elizabeth Arden's. While she was working there, someone who worked for a magazine called Honey noticed how beautiful Pattie was. This person thought Pattie had striking features and a natural charm that would be perfect for modeling. They encouraged her to try modeling, and this suggestion completely changed Pattie's life forever. By 1962, Pattie Boyd had jumped into the fashion world with both feet, and she quickly became one of the most popular new models. She started working in London but soon traveled to Paris, one of the most glamorous and fashionable cities in the entire world. Her face appeared in all the big fashion magazines like Honey, British Vogue, Vanity Fair, and the French magazine called Elle. Newspapers like the Daily Telegraph and the Times also featured her in their fashion sections. She became one of the most recognizable and famous models of the early swinging 60s. Pattie's look was perfect for that time period. She looked sophisticated but also young and fresh. She had a special mix of looking innocent but also bold and confident. This matched exactly what young people at that time were feeling. They wanted to break old rules and create their own new style. Pattie's fame really exploded when she appeared on the cover of British Vogue magazine. Getting on the cover of Vogue was a huge deal, and it proved that Pattie was now one of the top, most elite models of her time. She got to work with really famous photographers like David Bailey, Terence Donovan, and Brian Duffy. These photographers were super important in creating the whole swinging London look and vibe. Pattie and another model named Jean Shrimpton represented a completely new kind of beauty. They looked fresh, natural, and effortlessly stylish, meaning they looked great without seeming like they tried too hard. This was totally different from the 1950s, when models had to look perfectly groomed and polished all the time. Instead, Pattie and models like her embraced a freer, more relaxed kind of feminine beauty. This change in how women looked didn't just affect fashion. It changed how people thought about beauty and women's roles in all of Western culture. In early 1964, something happened that would change Pattie's life even more. She was working on a TV commercial for Smith's Crisps, which is a British chip brand. A director named Richard Lester was directing the commercial, and was really impressed by how charming and photogenic Pattie was. So he gave her a small role as a schoolgirl in a movie called A Hard Day's Night, which was the Beatles' very first movie. It was while filming this now famous movie that Pattie met George Harrison, who played lead guitar for the Beatles. They immediately felt a spark of chemistry and romance between them. Their relationship captured the attention and imagination of people all around the world. Being with George thrust Pattie into the crazy, high-pressure world of Beatlemania, where reporters and fans watched and judged everything she did. But it also brought her incredible exposure and fame. She became a cultural icon, not just a model, but a famous person in her own right. This made her modeling career even more successful and brought her to even greater heights. After she became famous as George Harrison's girlfriend, Pattie was flooded with even more modeling offers. She got more jobs with Vogue and Vanity Fair. She posed for a French photographer named Jean-Louis Sieff for a magazine called Tatler. She also appeared in commercials for brands like Smith's and L'Oreal. Her combination of beauty, elegance, and cool confidence made her a muse, meaning an inspiration, for fashion photographers and clothing designers. The newspapers and magazines often said that Pattie was by far the most glamorous of all the Beatles' wives and girlfriends. She became the perfect symbol of 1960s stardom. During this time, women everywhere were figuring out new ways to express their identity and style. Pattie Boyd became a symbol of modern beauty that was approachable, spontaneous, and chic. Fashion critics noticed that women wanted to look like Pattie Boyd instead of old Hollywood stars like Marlene Dietrich. This showed a big change in what people thought was beautiful and feminine. Pattie's popularity grew beyond just modeling when Gloria Stavers, who was the editor of a magazine called 16 Magazine, invited her to write a regular column. The column was called Pattie's Letter from London. In these columns, Pattie gave American teenagers a look into what was happening in the exciting London scene. She wrote about the latest fashion trends on Carnaby Street and gave insider information about what the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were wearing. Her fun, lively writing style and her insider perspective made young readers love her even more. But all this attention also brought some problems. Pattie started getting mean, hostile letters from jealous Beatles fans who didn't like that she was dating George. George Harrison told her she should stop writing the column for her own peace of mind and safety. Since Pattie was always creative and energetic, she redirected that energy into starting a business instead. She teamed up with her sister Jenny, who was also a model, and they opened a boutique shop called Jennifer Juniper. The shop was in a fashionable area of London called the Chelsea Market. They sold antiques, jewelry, and artwork, which showed that Pattie was interested in beautiful things beyond just fashion. In this business, Pattie was the buyer, which meant she would go to markets and art galleries searching for unique, interesting pieces to sell in the shop. Jenny handled the day-to-day running of the store. The boutique became a cool, stylish place where artists, musicians, and models would hang out. It represented the perfect mix of fashion and counterculture, the alternative, rebellious culture that defined 1960s London. In her later years of modeling, Pattie continued to grow and evolve in her career. She modeled clothing designed by a celebrated fashion designer named Ossie Clark. Ossie Clark and his wife and muse Celia Birtwell were creating new, exciting looks for the late 1960s and early 1970s. Pattie appeared on several more covers of British Vogue and did memorable photo shoots, including one that featured her sisters, which captured their shared elegance and natural grace. She also worked with a photographer named Justin de Villeneuve and the iconic model Twiggy for a cover shoot for Italian Vogue. This was yet another big achievement. In her amazing modeling career, Pattie Boyd's romantic life reads like a fascinating story full of love, heartbreak, and artistic inspiration. Her story spans some of the most extraordinary decades in rock and roll history. Her marriages to George Harrison, Eric Clapton, and later to Rod Weston each marked a different chapter of her life. From the glittering, dazzling height of Beatlemania to the quiet, peaceful calm of her later years, These relationships tell the story of a woman who lived right in the center of fame's most intense spotlight. Yet somehow, she managed to find peace and rediscover who she really was on her own terms. Pattie's first marriage was to George Harrison, the quiet, spiritually minded guitarist of the Beatles. They got married on January 21, 1966, right when Beatlemania was at its peak, meaning when the Beatles were at their most popular and famous. The wedding was actually pretty modest and small. It took place at the Epsom Register office in Surrey, England. Pattie, who had been working as a model, first met George in 1964 on the set of the Beatles' first movie, A Hard Day's Night. She was cast to play a schoolgirl fan in one of the train scenes. The two of them instantly felt a deep connection. George was famously shy but also very determined. He actually asked her to marry him on the very first day they met. She said no at first because she was already dating someone else at the time. But George's charm and sincerity, meaning how genuine and honest he was, eventually won her heart. Their marriage symbolized the perfect fusion or combination of pop culture and fashion. Pattie was one of the most prominent, recognizable faces of the swinging 60s, and George was one of the most admired musicians in the entire world. Their early years together were full of glamour and creativity. They lived at a place called Kinfauns, which was like a psychedelic dream house in Surrey. It became a meeting place for their famous friends like Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, and members of the Rolling Stones. However, the pressures of fame, the Beatles breaking up, and George's growing interest in spirituality began to put strain on their relationship. Pattie remembered that George's increasing devotion to meditation and his emotional distance created a rift, meaning a gap or separation, between them. Meanwhile, the temptations of fame, groupies, fans who follow rock stars, long times apart, and the complexities of George's spiritual searching all took their toll on the marriage. By the mid-1970s, George's affairs with other women and Pattie's own loneliness made their marriage impossible to continue. They separated in 1974 and officially got divorced in 1977. But Pattie always described George as her first great love. Not long after she separated from George, Pattie found herself pulled into another powerful love story, one that would inspire some of the most iconic, famous songs in rock history. Her second husband was Eric Clapton, the legendary guitarist who was also a close friend of George Harrison. Their relationship began under very complex and emotional circumstances. Clapton had fallen deeply in love with Pattie while she was still married to George. This caused him so much pain and torment that he wrote his 1970 masterpiece album, Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs. The main song, Layla, captured his anguish and obsession with loving a woman he couldn't have. Pattie was flattered but also conflicted, meaning she had mixed feelings and didn't know what to do. She resisted his romantic advances for years. She later revealed that Clapton's passion was both intoxicating and overwhelming. She described how his emotional intensity was so strong it bordered on being self-destructive, meaning it was almost hurting him. Eventually, after her marriage to George ended, Pattie and Eric got married in 1979. They were surrounded by friends and music royalty at their wedding. Their marriage was glamorous but also very turbulent, which means stormy and full of ups and downs. Clapton's career was doing great, but his battles with alcoholism and his affairs with other women created an unstable home life. Pattie often spoke openly and candidly about how difficult it was to live with someone struggling with addiction. She admitted that even though there were moments of tenderness and brilliance, the relationship was mostly marked by pain and disappointment. Songs like Wonderful Tonight and Bell Bottom Blues were born from their relationship. They were musical testaments, proof of Clapton's enduring fascination with her. However, as the years went on, their marriage fell apart under the weight of substance abuse and emotional strain. They got divorced in 1989. Even though their love story had ended, the songs she inspired continued to make her immortal as one of rock music's great muses. After years of emotional turbulence and public attention, Pattie eventually found lasting happiness in a quieter, more grounded relationship. She met Rod Weston, a property developer, in the early 1990s. Unlike her previous relationships, this one wasn't shaped by fame or artistic intensity. Instead, it was built on mutual understanding and friendship. The couple enjoyed a long partnership before finally getting married in 2015. After nearly 3 decades together, Pattie has often described Rod as her anchor, the person who keeps her steady and grounded. She says he restored a sense of stability and normalcy to her life after the whirlwind years she spent alongside two of the most celebrated musicians in history. At 81 years old, Pattie Boyd, the woman who inspired some of the most beautiful love songs in rock history, has finally opened up completely about her relationship with her first husband, George Harrison. For decades, the public only knew fragments or pieces of their story. There were romanticized headlines, song lyrics like "Something," and photos of a golden, perfect-looking couple during the height of the swinging 60s. Now, with the wisdom and distance that comes with age, Boyd has chosen to reflect honestly on the man she once loved so deeply and the emotional complexity of their marriage. "I adored George," she admits softly, "but being married to a Beatle was not a fairy tale. It was often lonely, confusing, and filled with contradictions." Pattie first met George Harrison in 1964 on the set of A Hard Day's Night, where she was cast as a schoolgirl extra. She remembered the moment very clearly and vividly. "George looked at me with those shy eyes of his and asked if I'd go out to dinner. I said I couldn't. I had a boyfriend. But he didn't give up." Within months, she and George began dating, and soon she was swept into the whirlwind of Beatlemania. To the world, they were young, beautiful, and seemingly untouchable, the perfect example of London's mod glamour. But behind closed doors, Pattie says the pressure of fame often weighed heavily on George. He was only 21, and the world was at his feet. But he was already searching for something more, something spiritual that fame couldn't give him. Their 1966 marriage was one of the most celebrated unions in the world of music. Yet the demands of the Beatles' fame soon began to strain their relationship. George was becoming increasingly absorbed in meditation and Indian philosophy. He spent hours practicing the sitar and talking about enlightenment. Pattie, though fascinated by it, sometimes felt left behind. "He was on a spiritual path," she recalls, "and I tried to follow him, but I felt like an outsider in his new world. I wanted to share his peace, but instead, I often felt shut out." As the late 1960s went on, George's friendship with guitarist Eric Clapton added another complicated layer to Pattie's life. Clapton fell deeply in love with her, and his unrequited feelings, love that wasn't returned, inspired one of the most passionate rock anthems ever written. Layla. Pattie remembers the turmoil of that time very clearly. "I loved George, but I was confused and heartbroken. There were times when we hardly spoke. Fame surrounded us, but inside our home there was silence." George, meanwhile, was rumored to have had affairs with other women. One of them was with Ringo Starr's wife, Maureen. "That was devastating," Boyd admits. "I felt like my marriage had lost its soul." Still, Pattie held on longer than many people might have expected. "I didn't want to give up on George," she says. "He had a kind, gentle spirit when he was himself. When he played guitar or talked about God, there was a light in his eyes that I'll never forget." Yet by 1974, the emotional distance between them had grown too wide, and Boyd made the painful decision to leave. "Walking away was one of the hardest things I've ever done," she reflects. "Part of me still loved him deeply, but I needed to find myself again." Over the years, Pattie and George remained in contact. Their relationship evolved from heartbreak into a quiet friendship. "We forgave each other in the end," she says warmly. "There was no anger left, only gratitude for what we shared." When George passed away in 2001, Pattie mourned him deeply. She realized that despite everything, he had left a permanent mark on her soul. He was my first great love, she confesses. I don't think anyone ever forgets that. Today, looking back, Pattie Boyd speaks of George Harrison not just as a rock legend, but as a human being, flawed, searching, and deeply spiritual. George wasn't perfect, and neither was I, she admits. But what we had was real. It inspired music, art, and emotions that still resonate, still matter and affect people, decades later. Sometimes I hear something on the radio, and it feels like he's still speaking to me through that song. It's beautiful and bittersweet. At 81, Boyd's reflections carry both tenderness and hard-won clarity. She doesn't romanticize the past, meaning she doesn't make it seem more perfect than it was, yet she honors it with a sense of reverence and respect. Love isn't always forever, she concludes, but it can shape who you become. George taught me to look beyond the material world, to seek peace within myself. That lesson has stayed with me all my life. In finally telling her truth, Pattie Boyd reminds the world that behind every legend is a human story, one of love, loss, forgiveness, and the enduring echoes of a bond that helped define an era.